Today on Mr. Media, I'll talk to book artist Richard Minsky, whose new collection slash autobiography is The Book Art of Richard Minsky. Stick around. This stuff is amazing. Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience of Amazon Kindle fans who can't figure out what the big deal about book art might be in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. Quite frankly, I'm way out of my usual comfort zone with today's guest, book artist Richard Minsky. Minsky is such a specialized artist that today may be the first and only time you'll ever see his one-of-a-kind work up close and almost personal. Of course, he'd really like it if you checked out the just-published collection of his work, accompanied by his autobiography in The Book Art of Richard Minsky. How to describe Minsky's art? Maybe by example. For a celebration of George Orwell's 1984, he constructed a bookbinding with an LCD monitor built into the leather cover and a miniature video camera hidden within. Now you hold the book up in front of you and you see yourself on the cover. Spooky. Now in The Geography of Hunger, that book is encased by what looks like human teeth. Message received, right? A collection of works by poet Patti Smith, titled Babel, is held together with safety pins, the symbol of the early punk movement. Of course, maybe teeth would have worked as well. Now, one more. For the jacket of a copy of writer Jeffrey Toobin's The Run of His Life, The People vs. OJ Simpson, Minsky mounted a leather glove on the cover, its fingertips dripping in blood. Now, for more examples, you can check out the slideshow at Minsky.com. That's M-I-N-S-K-Y. Now, I really don't know where this conversation is headed, but I do know that few of us has met an artist and a craftsman as unique as my guest today. Richard Minsky, welcome to Mr. Media.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. Richard, let me ask you something. Let's say we're at a party and a mutual acquaintance introduces us. We start making small talk, and I ask you what you do for a living. How do you explain it?
Well, it's funny because 30 or 40 years ago, if I said I'm a book artist or a bookbinder, people would get a glazed expression and wander away to the other side of the room. But these days, there are so many people who either have made some themselves or know someone who's made book art. They have a glimmer that I'm doing something with a book that is a work of art. And I transform books into physical objects that have the presence that communicates the metaphor of the contents. It's very different from trying to read a Kindle or a Nook or an ebook where it's just an abstracted text floating on the screen that looks the same from one text to another. This brings to life the inner world of the book and brings it to the outside, so when you first see it, you have a feeling that's unique to that book.
Is your work ever mass-produced, or is it always pretty much one of a kind?
Well, the book that we're talking about today, The Book Art of Richard Minsky, is mass-produced. Here, I've got a copy. I can hold one up. You can buy this at your local bookstore, and it's produced
This book?
in the same way any mass-produced book is. Yeah, you've got one too. Okay, we've got the same book.
Yeah, we'll show.
And so
we'll show the book.
it's possible to mass-produce a work of book art, depending on how you do it. Some of the things I do in small editions. Here's one I did. A publisher asked me to make 100 unique not unique, but to design a special binding for a book called Branches, which is Mitch Cullen's epic poem. He said he's sending me an epic poem. And I said, oh, Branches, it's going to be all about trees, and I'll do something pastoral and maybe bind it in bark paper. And when I opened it up, I got to the first page, and I'm reading about Sheriff Branches, who's lamenting that he threw his stepson down the well and has to shoot him because he didn't die in the fall like the other people he threw down there. So he's a very sympathetic character, Sheriff Branches, once you read the book. And it's beautifully written, and the lyrical style of it is at odds with the grisly nature of his character. Well, it turns out the stepson had joined a neo-Nazi group and was practicing with his 9mm pistol at man-sized targets behind the barn. And Sheriff Branches figured the law wouldn't do anything about him before he killed somebody.
Wow.
So he took the law into his own hands. Well, for that binding, I did something very simple. I made a sheriff's shirt cloth binding, complete with the pocket and the badge, and the name Branches, which is the title of the book, becomes the badge. Then I took my 9mm pistol and shot it right through the cover on all 100 copies of the book. So that's sort of mass-produced, although it's a kind of small mass.
That's a lot of bullets, Richard.
That's a lot of bullets.
So how many bullet holes in every book? 2 or 3?
They vary. It's about 7 in a book.
Wow, that's so. Now, who would that go out to? I think you said you made about 100 of those. Who would those go out to?
Well, whoever ordered them from him, I don't know who ordered them from him, and there are people who collect my work that it goes out to, and I imagine there's people who collect the authors' and illustrators' work, because it's an illustrated book as well. That's not the only change I made to the book. The trade edition of the book had black and white pictures by Ryuzo Kikushima, and what I've done is I've taken those black and white pictures that are in the book and made color prints that go over each of them. So each of these copies of the book have tipped in color pictures. So the interior of the book becomes special as well as the exterior. So that's one way of taking a book that can be one thing as a trade book and transforming it into a more interesting object.
Now, one of the books I mentioned in the introduction that you worked on was the Jeffrey Toobin book, People versus the Run of His Life, The People versus OJ Simpson. Is that a one-of-a-kind book with the glove with the blood tip?
No, that's that is part of an edition I did called the Bill of Rights. And what I did was I took, now if you see me looking down, I made an edition of which was supposed to be 25 copies. I've only managed to do 9 of them because it turned out to be a lot more work than I thought. So I bought 25 copies of Toobin's book. And I think here you can see, right?
Yep.
The book, and that one is become the Sixth Amendment of my Bill of Rights. The Sixth Amendment that guarantees people a speedy and public trial and right to trial by with a counsel to defend them. And of course, that became such a famous. I don't know if speedy was the word for that trial, but the counsel that defended him certainly gained a lot of fame in that, and the fact that we have the glove is as much because of what his counsel said, which you may recall is if the glove don't fit, you got to quit, and that's what happened. So it's an illustration in some ways of the American legal system. Whether it's the use or the abuse is up to the individual reader to decide.
And I should point out, we talk a lot about 3D films these days. These book covers that you do, this book art, it is 3-dimensional. It's absolutely 3-dimensional. People, it's a little hard for people to imagine, I guess, through the video. But that glove that's a real glove on top of the book.
It's a real glove.
You can feel it. You can get that sense of the texture of the glove, of the blood along the tips of the fingers. This is not. When I talk about in the description, in my introduction, about how this is amazing, it's amazing because you can see and feel it. It's when you buy a book in the bookstore or on Amazon, if you will, and you get the book, it's got a photo on it, or it's got a painting on it, or it's an illustration. What you do, you work in 3 dimensions. It's very tactile.
Yes, it's a very sculptural medium because books are four-dimensional, at least. And I try to add more dimensions than the four. People talk about three dimensions of the space and the fourth dimension of time because it takes time to read a book and to turn the pages. But there are also the dimensions of the tactile qualities, the olfactory properties, how it smells. There are many, it's how it sounds. The different paper sounds differently when you turn the pages. And I've also done books that include music as part of the book. So there's a variety of dimensions that you can use that you're not going to get just in an electronic text.
Have you ever?
But that's,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that it's not just my books that's true of. It's every book that a person owns. I don't think that you would have a single listener or viewer of your program that doesn't have at least one book that's of special meaning that they have as a physical book that they've handled many times. And when you see a book on your shelf, it doesn't matter if it's across the room. There could be a shelf full of books, and you know most of those books, what they are, without having to get up close and see the title. In 1973, when I had a storefront, bookbindery, and art gallery and print shop in Forest Hills, Queens, a woman walked into the door one day who had been a dietitian for 50 years. Mm-hmm. She brought me a book to repair. It was a cookbook that she had used for all that time. I said, it's going to cost you $50, which was a lot of money then, to fix this book. It was really falling apart. It was a mess. And it had stains everywhere, food all over it. And I said, you can get another copy for $5. But another copy wouldn't have had all of her memories that are embodied in those food stains. Mm-hmm. So once you've read a book and you've touched it, it's no longer the same book. That's your book, and the information that it carries isn't just the text. There may be an inscription to you from someone you loved, alive or dead. Mm-hmm. There may be your own coffee stains or a place where you dropped the book and it fell, and you remember those things from this physical object. You don't get that on your ebook.
One of the things that makes this book, The Book Art of Richard Minsky, so special is that in addition to getting a glimpse at so much of your work in one place, we actually get a bit of a glimpse into your life. We see how when you were very young, your dad died suddenly. Your interest in printing. Had you ever, gone into this much detail about your own background and how you became the artist and the man you are today, or is this all as fresh to me as it is to everyone?
Well,
vice versa.
I can't say that I never wrote about myself because previous books I had done were autobiographical. I did a book in 1980 called Minsky in London when I was sent to London in a cultural exchange where I had a studio for a year. And so there's autobiography there. And then over an extended period of about a decade, starting from about 1987 to 97, I produced a book called Minsky in Bed, which was the story of my love life. And that goes into from the crib to a couple of years before I wrote the book. And it has the romantic and not so romantic adventures of a clueless guy growing up in the 60s.
Oh, you wrote my story.
Which, it's so much an everyman kind of thing. I figured someone had to write it down. And, there was a lot happened then that was so unique to that time because of everything that was. And this is before AIDS. There's a lot of, and it's an illustrated book, but I did it in the style of incunabula. And the incunabula are the books printed between the year 1455, when Gutenberg produced his Bible, and the year 1501. And that's the early period of printed books when books were made to look like manuscripts. So you'd have a text and a commentary and gold illuminated letters with stories and pictures in the letters. I'm sure you've seen some of those in museum exhibitions, or maybe you have some reproductions of those books. But for my book, I wrote a text, and then I wrote the commentary, I wrote a text in the first person past as accurately as I remembered my feelings at the time, and then a text in the third person present from a narrator's point of view that gives the reader a different viewpoint of what was going on then, things that I wouldn't have thought to tell at the time. And I did this with gold leaf and printed it on the computer on handmade paper. So much in the way that printing was new in the 15th century, printing was new because it was the first time, starting in 1988, that you could print directly from your computer, inkjet onto handmade paper, and then gold leaf and illuminate it from there. So I sometimes take old and new technologies and meld them into something different.
You know, I want to ask you about that. You found your way into this career as a young boy who had this fascination with printing. You had your own printing press, printing device, and I immediately identified with that. I mean, growing up, I had, it was always trying to print newsletters, and I didn't have the printing device. I had to go somewhere and find someone who had a carbon machine or a what do we call them, Ditto, or I can't think of the other.
Yeah, a Ditto, or Rexograph, or a mimeograph.
Mimeograph.
Yeah.
And that was such a way in for me to where I am now in terms of being interested in writing, and I've published and I've done newspapers and magazines over the years. I wondered if you had strong feelings about the effect that we don't even call it desktop publishing anymore, but that's what started in the 80s, that kind of pushed all that aside. I mean, there's not a lot of kids out there that have the little printing presses that you had and were doing all those kind of things. Do you think that creativity that appealed to you, that drew me out in some ways, has been refocused towards the computer, or is that element of it just completely lost to the ages?
I think there's much more of it now. There's a big resurgence in letterpress printing now, so there are a lot of people going back to that who love lead type and ink. But it's really not about that so much as getting out your ideas and your communications and spreading the word about whatever. And every kid's got a Facebook now. It's instant. Publishing is as fast as you can type it. It's out there. We didn't have that. We got it out as fast as we could, which was like to make the stencil and produce it on the machine or set the type. But now, and with desktop publishing, you have kids in elementary school who are taking desktop publishing courses and learning how to use a computer and do graphic design and learning about fonts. So it really has, I think, improved the education and the abilities of kids to, every kid's a publisher. There's hardly a kid in America, and it's really spread to most of the world now. I mean, you have kids in islands in the middle of nowhere and kids in the heart of Africa who have their computers, in some ways thanks to Steve Jobs and some of the other initiatives that have gotten computers in the hands of these kids, and as well as gotten wireless connectivity to like the mountains of Brazil by having balloons with cell towers hanging from balloons that can, it's amazing how people are now connected in the world and that you can get your information out that fast.
Well, let's come back to what brought us here. Let's talk about book art. I'm kind of curious, what do you equate the practice of book art? I mean, is it like painting or glass blowing, for example, or is it you put it in a different type of category?
It is in every category I've ever been able to think of. It is like painting. Sometimes I paint on the covers of books. Sometimes it's not only like painting, it is painting. And in the sense of the craft aspect, it's like glass blowing. Because you have a lot of technique if you want to do a high-end crafted book. There's book art that's done that's very simple, from just folding papers and writing them by hand, or not even paper. I put together an exhibition in 1990. It circulated throughout Africa and Latin America called Book Art in the USA. Mm-hmm. And one of the pieces, the artist who had taken a chain of upholstery Naugahyde samples and did his book on them in magic marker. So sometimes it's not like glass blowing, and it's not quite like anything else, but it's that instinct that people have had, let's say at least since the time of caves 30,000 years ago, like Lascaux and Altamira, where people would put their content, their imagery, whatever they could do to express that urge to make a representation of something and to fix it in a preservable way.
How long does it actually take you, on average, let's say, because I know each piece is different, but how long does it take you on average to create one piece of book art?
Well, you mentioned earlier the Geography of Hunger. That was the book with the plastic teeth. That was like the mouth of the world. And inside that book, the end papers are mighty dog gourmet dog food labels because our old people eat dog food and our dogs eat better than most of the world. That was a book that Josue de Castro, the head of the Food and Agriculture Organization, wrote in 1953, I believe it was, saying that every country in the world can feed its people, but they don't for political reasons, and that's why there's starvation. So, to some extent, how long does it take me to have political consciousness about things that I think that are important to express the metaphor of in a work? I don't know how long that takes, but the actual fabrication of that book, which is made out of friendly plastic, took 1 day. Really? On the other hand, Minsky in bed took 9 years. So there's no correlation between, like, that turned out to be one of the most valuable things I had made, the Geography of Hunger. Another one I did that was similar, just took a couple of days, was The Crisis of Democracy. Okay, let's see if I can quickly find that in the book for your audience.
Well, while you look,
go
ahead.
There is the now this one took about 2 or 3 months. That's let's see, the 1984. That's me on the TV screen there on the cover of the book. Whereas the one on the facing page to that, that was Gordon Rattray Taylor's book on genetic engineering called The Biological Time Bomb. That just took a few hours. I just had to take some fireworks that were live and a timer and some wires and electrical tape and strap them onto the book. But now it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a difference in price or value because an idea comes out quickly. It's like the Buddhist monk who charged $10,000 to his client for a little manuscript squiggle, it appeared to be. And he said, how come it's so much? The monk did it right in front of him and just took like seconds. And the monk opens up a closet and 10,000 scrolls fall out with all the other. And he says, no, he says, that's what cost the $10,000. was getting there.
Now, do projects have to have political context for you to do them or be interested? Or?
Oh, not at all.
Okay.
So one thing, I was just going to show you The Crisis of Democracy,
Barbed wire.
which you see is made of sheep gold barbed wire. 3 materials that represent the metaphor of the text. To me, a lot is about the material. That's the Trilateral Commission's book, in which they say there's too much personal freedom in contemporary democracy that is necessary to curtail democracy. In other words, curtail personal freedoms is the way they say it, in order to preserve the governability of democracies. And we see this all over the world right now with what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening with the 99%. The question of people and their freedoms is always a question that's of interest. On the other hand, here's one that has nothing to do with politics. This is also a material meets metaphor binding, and that's the first one I did before I even knew what I was doing. In 1973, this Pettigrew's History of Egyptian Mummies, which I wrapped up in strips of linen, so on the shelf it looks like a mummified book. So it doesn't always have to do with politics, and sometimes it's just sometimes it's somebody needs a guest book for their house. So I'll do a painting of the house for the guest book, or I'll do a photograph, and that'll be on there. Because sometimes the books are utilitarian. A book for a bar mitzvah. Here is Susan Meisel's book on the Hamptons. I went out to the beach in the Hamptons. I got to move back so you can see the whole thing. And I gathered up some of the beach, and I painted some of the waves coming onto the beach, and I actually put the sand and the stones and the shells onto the cover of the book. So in some ways I try and use materials that evoke the metaphor of the content, whether it's political or not political, and sometimes it's old structures. Look, there's one I did for a Franciscan friar who needed to carry his breviary wherever he went. So I went back to the same structure that was used by friars in the 14th century, the girdle book. The girdle is the strap, the cord that holds their robe shut. And here, they can wear that so that their hands are free, and they just flip the book up and open it, and it's always available for them to do their prayers. So there's a variety of things that come when you're doing a book. Everyone is unique.
Well, Richard, just a couple minutes left, so I just want to ask you a couple quick things. Do you work primarily on commission?
No, I don't work primarily on commission, nor do I work primarily independently. A lot of the books are things that I want to present to the public for exhibition purposes and to reach out and raise people's consciousness. Those I just do. And then if it's a wedding book or a guest book or a bar mitzvah book or a book, someone just had me bind a text to give to her husband as a birthday present because it was a book that he loved. So some of them is that kind of bookbinderly work, and some are books that I write, and some of them are books that. So I have no rules.
And I know a lot of the work that you've completed over the years is in private collections. If a piece was available, what would it cost someone to acquire a piece of Minsky book art, or just even a range, I guess?
The range is from somewhere about, if it's a unique piece, we're not talking about an edition. A unique piece can be anywhere from about $3,000 to something like the Bill of Rights. That's a 10-volume set, very limited edition, and that's $120,000. So there's a big range of what's involved. The book I showed you before, Branches, is actually $395 right now. It's going to be $850 after February 1st. So I'm not sure when your viewers are going to be seeing this, but let's say under $1,000.
Wow. All right, and finally, what's next for you? This book has just come out, and I know because we started talking more than a year, maybe 2 years ago, about having you on the show. I had your wife, Barbara, on, talking about how to do a graphic novel, her book. What's next for you?
Well, right now I'm working on Charles Mackay's book, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, that first came out around 1841 and then 1855, and I got a 1960s reprint of a 1932 facsimile of it, which I liked 1932 because it was the depths of the Depression, and I'm binding that with my expired credit cards.
Interesting. All right.
Well, I think that was one of the biggest popular delusions of our era, was the credit economy.
Well, that'll be interesting. I'd like to see that.
And there's another materialist metaphor kind of idea. And then I'm also working on my current exhibition of American Decorated Publishers Bindings, 1875 to 1930. I did a book on that, which, I don't know, do you have this one?
No. That's nice.
Well, we'll have to do this one on another session.
Okay.
This is a book also published by George Braziller. George Braziller is the publisher of the book art of Richard Minsky.
Okay.
And that's 2011. In 2010, he published my book on decorated American cloth bindings of the Golden Age, when books were just so beautiful. You go into a bookstore and it would be glistening in gold. If you look behind me, you can see. Let's see if I can tilt the camera.
Okay.
And we'll see if we can actually get this into the. You see them on the shelf up there, and let's see if we can turn it into the exhibit case over here. These are all books from the 1870s to about 1930.
Okay.
Can you see any of that on your screen?
Yes, we can see it. We're losing your sound, though.
Okay.
There you are. All right. Well, that's fascinating.
Okay.
Well, listen, folks, you can find the book art of Richard Minsky in great bookstores everywhere, online or in person, or you can order it right now, right here, at a great price at mrmedia.com. I mentioned before that folks can find out more about your work, see more in the slideshow at Minsky Minsky.com, Minsky. Can they find you on Twitter or Facebook? Do you have time for any of that kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, I like Facebook. Sure, you can find me on Facebook. I do tweet occasionally,
Okay.
so you'll find me there as a I can't even remember my Twitter name. See, there you go. That's what happens when I used to have a memory, but what happened is all my gray cells in my brain went into my beard, and I shaved one day.
What are you saying?
The memory went with the hair.
All right. Well, listen, Richard, this was fun. I don't feel like I was totally in over my head, and thank you so much for joining us in Mr. Media today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure seeing you.
Our pleasure. For more original interviews, surf over to our main website, mrmedia.com, mrmedia.com. If you've enjoyed today's show, subscribe for free to Mr. Media via email, RSS, or iTunes, and you'll never miss a show. Another good idea, download our new free Mr. Media mobile app in the Android market. You can also listen with a piece of string and a tin can in many parts of the internet. Show your support of Mr. Media by supporting our sponsors, including Audible. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/radio. Again, that's audibletrial.com/radio for your free audiobook. We're also supported by thepartyauthority.us. Call DJ Ira for all your party entertainment needs nationwide at 1-800-DIAL-DJs or visit their website, thepartyauthority.us. If you've got an idea for a guest, a comment on today's show, or would like to advertise on Mr. Media Radio, email me directly at bob@mrmedia.com, mrmedia.com. You can also call our 24-hour listener line at 1-727-498-4711. Some messages may be used in an upcoming show, and unless you live next door to Mr. Media, there may be a toll charge. You can also follow Mr. Media on Facebook, Twitter, or our new YouTube and Vimeo video channels. Thanks so much for joining us today. I always appreciate you sharing a piece of your day with Mr. Media. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hey everybody, this is Bob Andelman from Mr. Media. First of all, I want to thank you for years of support listening to this show. We're starting our 6th year, it's hard to believe, our 6th year as 2012 starts, and heading towards our 1,000th online podcast, audio and video. It's pretty amazing, frankly. I remember starting it several years ago thinking this will never last. And podcasts, that's as stupid a word as blogging. But here we are, starting our 6th year and heading up to 1,000 interviews. And I want to thank everybody for listening and supporting the show. I also want to tell you that one of the things that's been very helpful for this show is Stitcher Radio. Yes, this is sort of a commercial. Now, there are millions of smartphone apps in the world, but I only use one several times a day, Stitcher Radio. I build my own radio station to listen to broadcast and online shows when I want and in the order I want. CNN News Update, Onion Radio News, WTF with Mark Maron, MSNBC's Morning Joe, Studio 60, the TechCrunch headlines, and of course, Mr. Media. It's free, it works on iPhone, Android, BlackBerry, Palm Pre, and much more. And you can get it for free for yourself. Try it out. I guarantee you're going to love it. Stitcher.com/MRmedia. That's Stitcher.com/Mr. Media. You're going to love it. And thanks again for supporting the show.